I think you also can do some demo, right, Aaron?
Yes, that's right.
Over to you, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Sambri. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining our webinar session. Thanks to Sambri for the introduction about Storecove. Today, what I would be doing is taking you guys through some high-level demo on how you would set up your account in at Storecove and start and potentially receive your first invoice through our platform. Now, having said that, I would start off with the first part of the demo. It's a 4-part demo with an expected time of 25 to 30 minutes in totality. The first part where I would take you guys through how you would request a Sandbox account, which most of you might have already gone through this process. Then how you would create a first legal entity, because that's required before you can start sending or receiving a document. Then finally, preparing your test tool to first to begin using the application using an external tool like Postman, which a lot of us are familiar with. Now, without further ado, let me start sharing my screen. Entire screen. I think entire screen would be better. All right, give that a moment to load up. Okay, all right. So to begin with, in order to use our service, the first thing you have to do is to ask for a free trial account or a Sandbox account. You can simply go to Storecove and then go to Start Now here to ask, where it will lead you to a form that you would fill up to request for a Sandbox account. Typically, it takes about 24 hours for a Sandbox account to be created and set up for you. When you request this, the country where you would reside in would be quite an important indicator so that we can configure it correctly. Because Storecove, the way you would register your account for every country, it's slightly different, which we'll see in a moment. Once you have received your access to the Sandbox, you can proceed to log in. Also keep in mind at the same time, you should also bookmark this page where if you go to E-invoicing API, and then if you go down here, you have a setup guide, which is high level. And then here you have an API docs, which leads you to Storecove's API documentation, which you would click to open for the range of contents we have to guide you through the process of sending your first document. Now, as soon as you have received your login credential, go on to app.storecove.com and then put in your credentials and then click to log in. Now, once you have logged in, the first thing it does is it brings you to your legal entity page, where it says here senders. Now, again, as part of, before attempting to use the solution, the first thing you want to do is to create a legal entity so that you can send or receive. So if you scroll down at the bottom here, you can go on to create your legal entity. It's a very common form that you can just type in all the information you need. And again, you're not creating, you might create for your account, but keep in mind for Malaysia, we allow unlimited legal entity, which means you as a customer can register multiple companies under you within your account in Storecove. Now, the country is quite an important field because once you select the country, this form may change because depending on that country's requirement. In some countries, there's additional information that needs to be captured as part of your legal entity creation. For instance, once you choose Malaysia, you can also see county, which is state in Malaysia, has to be selected also because it's tied into a specific code that we need to provide when we are reporting our invoices, say to LHDN or via PayPal. And that most of it is quite a commonly required information, whatever that is in dark red or maroon for the matter, is a mandatory field. Now, where we typically see people might struggle is when you get to my.eif. My.eif is a terminology used for PayPal Malaysia. It's nothing more than just your SSM number. But provided that your SSM number must always start with a 01 or 02 or 03 prefix, one of these. If you're unsure, you can just simply start with 01. It should be okay. Followed by your SSM number. A typical SSM number or business registration number in Malaysia begins with the year. And then you go on and just type in whatever your SSM number or the business registration number that you have for your account or for the company or the legal entity that you're registering for. Now, if you notice, once you have typed in the number in the correct format, it will turn green. So again, You always start with prefix as required by the PayPal Authority of Malaysia. If you're not sure what's the prefix, you can go with 01, or you can even go with 99 for test indicator. Okay. Now, once you feel that in, technically at this point, you can already start sending invoices or receiving via PayPal. But if you're also looking to create an entity that reports invoices via LHDN, which is the local tax office of Malaysia, it's also important that you put in the TIN number. Because without a TIN number, you cannot send an invoice through to LHDN. At this point, also keep in mind, it's required by LHDN that if you want to submit an invoice through a third party like Storecove, you must elect or nominate Storecove as an intermediary from the My Invoice portal or My Invoice app. So you just have to log into your LHDN portal using your credential and then add Storecove as the intermediary for your account so that we can start submitting invoices on your behalf. Now for SSC, not everyone might have an SSC number. At this point, you can just simply say, my organization doesn't have this number. Now, if you would fill up everything and if all the mandatory fields are filled up, you would simply click on save and request for validation. At this point, once you have clicked it, the first status you will see is that validation in progress. Of course, the account that I'm showing, it says validation succeeded, but at least for 24 hours, sometimes lesser than that, the status would be validation in progress. Now, what is validation in progress, or what that means is it's simply a process where we at a backend, we have a team who are checking if your business registration details are correct, or if your details are correct, and if you're a legit and a valid company. Now, why we are doing it, not because Storecove requires it, because it's required by the Malaysian PayPal Authority as part of the KYC process to check the details of every entity that is created before allowing that entity to send or receive an invoice through Storecove. Now, having said that, it also means that as soon as the entity's validation is marked as successful, it automatically registers the entity into the Malaysian SMP, which is the PayPal Malaysia Yellow Book directory. So again, that's not a separate process you have to do. It's automatic as soon as you create an entity and if the validation is successful. Now, at this point, you have done your first entity creation. Now you can start sending an invoice or start trying our API out through the various different endpoints that we have provided. Now, keep in mind, we always encourage you to use an external tool for testing all the different API endpoints that is published through our documents here, so that you don't have any other internal system or an external system that is interfering with the testing that you're performing. Our preferred tool is Postman, and we think a lot of companies today also use Postman for their API development activity. Now, you can also see from our API documentation here, it takes you through quite in detail on how you would get started and you'd go through the process, right? Now, if you're using Postman, again, it's slightly easier, which means you don't have to type out every single thing that you see here. You can simply scroll down to where it says Postman tool here, and then you can download our entire repository of APIs that we have published. So you can just, right click, download it, or in this case I would save link as, and then you will download the file. After you have downloaded it, and then you can open your Postman app. You would typically download the app from Postman, and then once you have opened, if it's a new account, you may have blank where it says collection. It's basically collections of your API. You may have blank, or you may have existing projects that you're working on. We suggest you have a separate project for Storecove. At this point, you would simply click import, and then you would import the API file that you just have downloaded. For instance, I have this. I would just upload it. I won't do it at the moment because I've already uploaded right before this call. Once you have uploaded it, here I have a simplified view. You may have more APIs enabled. I've removed those that is not required for this demo so that we can just focus on what we are going to be doing in this demo. Now, the first thing you want to do once you have your Postman set up is you want to make sure that can you actually talk to Storecove's app. Now, to begin with is to talk to Storecove, you don't have separate addresses or API endpoint for every account. Everyone uses the same API endpoint. The way this is differentiated is through a specific API key that you would generate yourself through your account. Let me just demonstrate what happens, right? The first thing you want to do, the easiest way to check if you're successfully connected or successfully using our API is by going to this discovery API. This is a test API that you can use. And really, it's not entirely test. It's actually something that you would really use to check if you want to send a document to another person to see if that person is enabled through, say, PayPal. So I'm going to try this now. So it says discover network participant, and I would go here. And I'm discovering if they would receive a document. So, I've just taken a random ID, scheme ID identifier. You can easily get this from PayPal directory. And then I'm going to click send. Now, at this point, you can see it says 403 forbidden, generic not authorized. Now, the reason for that is so far at no point here that, we have created the Postman tool. We have set up the API, but there's no place that we have put in our credentials. Now, we see a lot of our customers stuck in this place also where they keep getting 403 or 401 or not authorized error. Now, this really means that you have not built in your credentials into the Postman tool. Now, how you would do that is first you have to go and get your credentials. So you would go here, and then depending on how your setup is, you'll go to settings, you'll go to API key, and then you would attempt to create a new API key. So you can create it. Okay, once it's created, it'll be given to you. You can have a look at it. Take this API key and then go back, and that's actually your login credentials. Take that API key, go back into your Postman tool. Now you can set a global authentication method. So for this case, I will go to my Postman again. I'll go to authorization, and then I'll choose the authorization type as API key, and then the key should be authorization. Now, it follows if you're someone who likes to code from scratch, it's the same thing as using this where it says authorization header, bearer, API key here. So it's the same thing here. It's just that you're automating it or making it simpler using a tool if you prefer that. And then you'll have a bearer, and I have already set up my API key in this form. I have a Storecove environment that is set up where I've plugged in my API key already. So in this case, once I've set this up, I can go back and attempt to send a discovery API again. Now, once it's done, at this point, if you get 200 OK, status 200 OK, that means you have successfully spoken to our API and you have got a response message back. What this really means is that this receiver can receive document from you, but they cannot receive it via email. So that is how you might use this API. Okay, let me switch. Just give me a moment. All right. So once you have checked, done a test API run, and notice that everything works correctly. So let's go in and send our first document through. Now I'll go to document submission, and then I would submit a document network, a new document through the Exchange network. Now, where you can get this test data. Now, again, if you follow our guide exactly as it is, you see we have registered for an API access, created an API key, and sent our first invoice through. We have actually published a number of samples depending on what you are testing for, let's say to EU and to Singapore, or from Singapore or within Singapore, and so on. Now, if you're interested to just test for Malaysia for the purpose of this, I will scroll right at the bottom here, and I'll go to Malaysia, and then it should be right at the bottom of Malaysia. You have full MY feature invoice set. I'll just copy this, and then I'll paste it here, which I've done. Now, there's a couple of things you have to make sure when you're doing this, right? Now, number one, you must make sure you're using your legal entity ID, not the legal entity ID that is given in the sample. And the legal entity ID must match the sender entity ID that you created or you received when you created your first sender. So that will be right here. So you can see you have your legal entity that is created here. So just take this number and put in here. Now, because I am sending it via the PayPal network, I have to provide an identifier for myself and the receiver. This is my PayPal identifier. My EIF means Malaysia PayPal network, and this is my ID, which I plugged in when I created my first entity earlier. It's nothing more than just your SSM number. And then you put in your information. And then the other thing that you have to prepare in your test data is who you want to send it to, your accounting customer party. Now, at this point, you can try to find a test ID. We have also published a number of test ID. What's important here is that because you're sending it via PayPal, you must also make sure you're giving them a routing identifier through public identifier. So which is this, right? So my EIF, again, this is the recipient. Now, if everything works out, I'll also just to make sure we are doing this right, I'll make sure my authorization already have my API key, because if you don't have it, you'll get a not authorized error. So at this point, I would simply just send the document through. So if it passes without an error, which means you got a status 200 okay with a global UID, that means we have received the document. So at this point, remember again, you are just sending it via PayPal network. You have to make sure the receiver have received it. At this point, you would like to know whether the receiver received the document and what's the status of it. So what you would do is that as soon as you got the GUID, depending on how you have set up your account, you would go and check for the evidence of the document that you just submitted. So at this point, I will go to document submission, evidence, and then I'll go to get submission of, there's also a root here that says evidence type, and I'll go to get document submission. Now I'll simply come here, again, everything is filled up if you download our script, and then I'll fill up the GUID here, and it should give me the evidence. So you can see here, when you're automating it, we suggest that for Exchange, you don't have to wait, because again, it's real time. If it's reporting, you do have to give it some time, because we are reporting it to the tax office, waiting for the response. So today, now we are only doing Exchange. At this point, as soon as you get a GUID, you can go and get the get document submission evidence report. Once you put it here, you will actually get the full set of document of how we have sent it, who we sent it to, the format we have sent it in, and every other information that is required for your record keeping. So this is an example of sending a document via PayPal. Now I'll go back to our presentation to go to the next module. Now keep in mind, we just covered demo part 1 and demo part 2, which we just sent an invoice through the Exchange network, in this case, PayPal Malaysia. Now we're going to do demo part 3, which takes you through the LHDN reporting. Now keep in mind, guys, when you're sending an invoice that also involves LHDN reporting, that means that now you have to send a document through and then see if Storecove have accepted it, which means if you have accepted it, we have pre-validated your data. And then next, you have to wait until we tell you that the document has been cleared or not by the tax authority, right? So in this case, you have two ways to do this. One is you can keep polling us to see if we have already received a result from the tax office, or you can wait until we send you an event notification to say that the document has been processed, and then you can go and check it. Now, keep in mind that both of this is done through a process called webhook. Webhook is like a notification event handler. We have a couple of ways of doing this, and I'll take you through this. So the first thing we're going to attempt to do now is to set up our webhook. Now, at this point, let's go back to app.storecove.com again. So you'll go to setting, and then you'll go to webhooks. So at this point, you would need to create a webhook. If it's a new account, you would not have any webhook created. For the purpose of this, let's try to create a webhook. Now, you have a few events to notify. Really, you have to choose two only, either document sending result or new document received. So again, you can be notified through an event if you receive a document through an external party via Storecove. So for now, because we are doing tax reporting to LHDN, so we're going to send a document, and then we want to know the result of the document once or if it's not been validated. So I will select document sending result. At this point, you have two options. Push method, it means that it's basically where Storecove would notify you of the result. If you want us to notify you of the result, you have to tell us where you want the notification to be sent or the ping to be sent. So if you select this, you have to mention the URL where you want us to send the notification through. Now here I won't be using a test URL, so I'm just going to say pull method. Pull method, which means we would store the webhook in our software or in our application or platform, and then you have to keep polling to see if a notification is available for you to pull. So I'm going to create that webhook, and as a matter of fact, that's what I've created. It says the webhook will be stored and to be retrieved via HTTP GET. All right. So if you have created the webhook already, and the same thing with receive document, and I'll just take you through very quickly on that. So for new document received, same thing, you can either be notified through a URL or where you poll every 5 or 10 minutes if a document has been sent for you. That's also an option. So once you have created your webhook, you can go in and try to submit a document through. Now, again, the same thing, you can attempt to submit the document through, so you can attempt to submit the document using the test data that we have prepared. Let me see this. The only difference when you're submitting a document, so if you notice here, for exchange, which means you're just sending the document via PayPal without reporting to the tax authority, what will happen here is that you only have routing, identifier. Nowhere here you are adding a flag that says to report it. Now, if you would like us to report it to LHDN, you would then add a flag for that. Now, so this is where I'm coming to. So you take a test data. At this point, the only difference between sending via PayPal and to report via LHDN is to now add a flag that says network application MI LHDN enabled true. So this means when I send this data now, it will directly be sent to LHDN. Now, again, remember at this point, you have to make sure you have already appointed Storecove as the intermediary. Otherwise, LHDN would reject, as Storecove is not authorized to submit the document on your behalf. Again, use the same legal entity for who you have created earlier. If you notice, I've still enabled routing here. What this means is that once it has been approved by LHDN, we will automatically send it via PayPal, right? Now, having said that, I would just slightly change the invoice number because I attempted to send this via LHDN earlier. So I'm just going to change it. Then I'm going to send it in now. So let's see what happens. So at this point, it means that once you have received a GUID, it means it has passed Storecove's pre-validation. If it has passed for pre-validation, you just now have to wait for the result from LHDN. Typically, depending on the time of the day, sometimes it can take as quick as 3 minutes. Sometimes it can even take up to 10 minutes. It really depends on the server response that you get from LHDN. Now, while we wait for that, I also want to show you don't have to necessarily use API. While you're testing, let's say you're troubleshooting things, Storecove also have prepared an interface where you can go and check for items directly here. This is, we can see at settings, and then you can go to integrator, and then you can go to webhook history, and then you can see here, blah, blah, blah. You can see the document number or what we have sent. Let me just make sure I am in the right one, document sent. Okay, here you go. All right, so you can see that this was the document that we sent. You can see it's demo 02345, which what I changed earlier. And then you can see here, you can simulate the webhook. It says here that if it's an Amber, it means we haven't received a notification yet. You can see that the invoice was successfully sent to LHDN and is waiting for clearance. Now, this is if you're troubleshooting. Of course, you're not expected to log into the platform to check for this. You can always use the API. And how you would use the API. So again, remember, there's 2 ways we would notify you. One is we automatically notify you to the website that you want us, or URL that you want us to notify you to. Number 2, you can keep polling. You poll if there's a new notification available. What I would do then is that you can go to webhook. Again, webhook is like a notification. And then I'll go to get a webhook instance. And then again, make sure your authorization is correct. And then I'll simply send to see if I have any webhook available for me. So you can see here, it just showed that I already have a webhook available for the event of cleared. Cleared means it's any reporting or clearance that we perform. So at this point, you can simply fetch this GUID and go back to evidence earlier. And then you will go here. The only difference was that earlier, when you're checking for evidence, you only check for sending. So you can see here, it says sending. But now you want to check for clearance or reporting GUID. So at this point, you will just put in the GUID and then you'll click this. And then now you'll get all the response message back, right? So this is the response that you get from LHDN directly. You can see the receiver is LHDN. The sender is yourself, the GUID. and then you will get all the information you need. So really, the information that you ought to be capturing when you send a document through LHDN is the transmission ID is basically the UUID, and then you have the long ID. So with the UUID and the long ID, you can already create the long ID is here. This is the submission ID. This is the UUID. This is the long ID. Of course, we have always heard about the QR code that you have to generate. The QR code is just a combination of both this partner key and this long ID. There are also other information we are providing to you. For instance, validation date. You can also capture that and put it into your response back, say, to your customer. Now, we do have a QR code field here. This doesn't mean it's an LHDN QR code. This QR code field is there because, again, Storecove is a global e-invoicing API provider. We also provide in countries where the government generates the QR code and provides it back in the response. So only in that localization or jurisdiction where the government is generating the QR code on your behalf, or the tax office is creating the QR code, they would then return back in the response message and we would provide it to you. So that sums up about sending an invoice through the multiple, through Exchange network, and also through reporting it to LHDN. Now, the final demo that I wanted to take you guys through was about receiving a document. Now, the earlier setup that I did was receive. Okay, let's see. Tap on. So earlier when I sent the document, I sent it to myself actually. Of course, you can use any PayPal ID for the matter. Now, if you have, so if you notice earlier I was sending a document, I actually was sending it to myself. And then when I send it to myself, it means I also received the document. So I've already received the document and already have a webhook available for me to check. So again, how would you be notified if you have received a document? It's either, it's always through the webhook where we are providing you with the notification if you have provided us with the URL, or you would go and check if you have a received document available. So I'll quickly show you how a received document flow looks like. So you would go to purchase invoices. Purchase invoices is basically AP invoices, accounts payable invoices, because that's where you would receive invoices if you are sent a document for you to fetch. So you'll go to get purchase invoices. You'll take the API key that you would get from your from the webhook that you requested. Now, what you would do then next is you go to the you would put in the GUID from the webhook, and then you will simply just click send. At this point, you would have all the document, this particular document that is available for you to download and store in your system. Again, you'll have everything, document type, invoice type, everything that we support for the matter, right? Which would be, it's again in JSON. It's very close to the JSON that you send to Storecove. You would also receive a very similar field, just that there might be one or two fields that will be slightly different, but in most of it, it will be a very identical JSON format. So that concludes my demo period. So I'll just switch back to our presentation again. Now, so as a summary, we went through initial setup. Again, you request a sandbox, you create a legal entity, set up your testing environment, make sure always to test with an external tool rather than directly testing, say, from your IDE, your code terminal, or any if you're using Visual Studio or anything like that. Always try to use an external app before moving the code to your own setup. And then you can send, and once you have tested it to be working, you have to set up a webhook. Otherwise, we can't notify you on the result of any transactions that you do through our platform. Prepare test data. You don't have to prepare. You can always grab the test data that we have published for the various different scenarios in our API documentation. Then go ahead and submit your first test invoice and then check on the submission status. And if you have a reporting involved, you have to enable the flag. If you don't enable, we don't automatically send it. So if you have enabled, we always send it. You can choose to only do exchange, or you can choose to only do reporting, or you can do a combination of both. It's completely up to you. So again, prepare the test data or grab the test data we have published, submit the test invoice, and then check on the clearance status. You should get everything you need from there. And then finally receiving an invoice. Again, don't forget to set up a webhook. You must set up different webhook for sending and receiving. And then ensure you have a way of checking the webhook. If you are polling, then finally just retrieve the received document. That's about it, guys. Now, I don't see any questions. So yeah, thank you very much for staying on with us.